The bull market's back, and I'm on the hunt for the best crypto sector. Today, we're analyzing the Layer 2 blockchain sector, which is finally getting its chance to shine this upcoming cycle. As always, I'll share some pros and cons, I'll rank it against all the other sectors out there, and I'll share some potential projects that you could invest in. So let's get started with the pros, aka the case for Layer 2 projects. My first pro is that these projects hold the key to blockchain scalability. This is especially relevant in a modular blockchain world, where different chains split up the duties of executing and settling transactions. In such a world, the Layer 1 blockchains are responsible for settlement, while Layer 2s do all the execution, which means they're the chains we actually use and interact with. This division of labor is incredibly important, because most of the Layer 1s out there struggle with scalability. They can't handle all the demand for block space from the various apps out there, so they need the Layer 2s to come in and help. These Layer 2s offload thousands of transactions from the L1 and process them on their own blockchain. They use some cryptography magic to condense a bunch of transactions into a single one, and then send that to the underlying Layer 1 for settlement. So we've gone from thousands of transactions to just one. And that's why Ethereum, with its theoretical maximum of around 50 transactions per second, can work perfectly with its Layer 2s, such as Arbitrum, which can do 4,000 TPS, or Immutable X, which can do 9,000. But honestly, this increase in scalability is just scratching the surface of what L2s can offer. Because when demand for L1 block space gets too high, those become super expensive to use. So this leads me to my second pro, which is the fact that Layer 2s make blockchains economically viable to use. Just take a look at Ethereum's notoriously high gas fees to see what I mean. In 2023, this trader paid an eye-watering 64 ETH, or nearly $120,000 for a single transaction. That was during the meme coin frenzy, which caused some crazy congestion issues across the network. But that's not only a one-time ordeal though. Just look at these gas fees, hundreds of dollars for a simple swap. And that's actually common during times of high demand. Fortunately, we have L2s like Arbitrum and Optimism, which can drastically reduce these costs for users. The average transaction fee is only 8 cents on Arbitrum and 9 cents on Optimism. And they're able to achieve those low fees because remember, they batch together thousands of transactions and condense them into a single one on the underlying L1. So even if their transaction is charged hundreds of dollars in fees by the L1, well, that fee is split amongst all the batch transactions, making them much cheaper individually as a result. This is why L2s are absolutely necessary if we want DeFi to be usable by the masses. Because let's say someone wants to buy 300 bucks worth of some meme coin, right? But it costs 50 bucks in gas fees to do so. Well, they most likely would just give up. So this is why I say L2s are solving a critical problem here. Anyways, my next pro is that all these benefits that L2s bring means that they alone can pave the way for mass adoption. Here's the thing. Not all use cases in crypto are created equal. While some DeFi derivatives protocol or real-world assets project may bring in a lot of new capital, they're never going to attract the millions of individuals needed to get to mass adoption. That is only made possible by certain use cases, such as gaming or social networking. And for those, they have to use Layer 2s in order to properly function. Let's take blockchain games as an example. Those rely heavily on microtransactions. Within these games, players often receive in-game rewards in the form of NFTs. But imagine that you received 5 new NFTs during every raid, simultaneously with thousands of other players. Well, Ethereum definitely can't handle that. If the game tried to process those on the main Ethereum network, each of those transactions would cost hundreds of dollars in gas fees. And that's if they even get processed in a timely manner. But for L2s, this is not a problem as they can facilitate fast and cheap transactions, which means these games can operate on them without skipping a beat. A great example of this is Ronin, the Layer 2 project behind the blockchain game Axie Infinity. Ronin's active addresses have actually tripled in November, from around 20,000 to 70,000 daily active users. Their growth is undeniable, and it just shows you that these L2s can unlock some powerful use cases such as gaming. But honestly, it's not just gaming or social-fi that need L2s to operate. Most Web3 use cases would simply be impossible without L2s. I'm talking supply chain, voting systems, digital identity, you name it. All these use cases need the scalability and cost efficiency of L2s, and that makes me super bullish on the future of the sector. But here's the thing. all this talk about needing L2s, it's not just theoretical. We can actually see it in the stats. And that actually leads me to my next pro, the fact that L2 adoption is growing rapidly, and the numbers speak for themselves. For example, the total value locked in layer 2s tripled in 2023, from 4.5 billion at the start of the year to an astonishing 15 billion by December. The average transaction throughput also grew over 2x, from 18 transactions per second to over 40. And these L2s can handle way more than that, by the way. That figure is just the amount of transactions that are actually being processed by them. Now, another impressive stat is that L2s processed 61% of all Ethereum transactions in Q3, taking over the lion's share of the work. And if we're to look at a specific example, we can look at Coinbase's Base, which became the fastest blockchain to reach 100,000 daily users. Moreover, the total value locked on Base surpassed 411 million by the end of September, which is just a single month from its launch. So clearly L2s are on the up and up, and I don't see that trend changing anytime soon, which makes it a great reason to be bullish on the sector. Alright, so I bet you're super bullish after hearing all those pros, but before we get to my thought-provoking cons, I want to share with you our very own Coinsider Tokenomics Rubric. We spent probably 100 hours making that, but it's yours for only $9.95. This is the culmination of all our experience analyzing tokenomics for various crypto projects. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then just watch my Caspa tokenomics analysis stream that I did a few weeks ago. Basically, you can use this rubric to calculate a comprehensive score for the tokenomics of any coin or token out there, and then you can use that score to compare projects and see which one is more quality. So link below, go get that ASAP if you're interested. Anyways, back to the cons, or the case against layer 2s. My first one is that there's a Grand Canyon sized gap between layer 1s and layer 2s. You can see this gap manifests itself in a few different ways. The first of which is the gap in terms of institutional interest. Institutional investors are the whales that have billions of dollars to deploy, and they're way more interested in L1s than L2s. For proof, just look at all the recent ETF and trust filings by these TradFi firms. They're all for layer 1 tokens, none for layer 2s. But this gap does go beyond just institutional interest. There's also a gap in terms of developers. If you look at this list of all the ecosystems and how many devs they have, you'll see that all the top spots are dominated by layer 1 projects, with the first layer 2 project quite far down the list. So this is a big deal, right? Because developers build the apps that bring about growth and adoption. So with less developers, L2s will have a harder time growing their ecosystem compared to the L1 counterparts. But then all those factors combined translates into a big gap in the market cap of these two sectors. The top L1 protocols, excluding Bitcoin, have a market cap of around $470 billion, while the top L2s only boast a cumulative market cap of $21 billion. So that's a massive 22x difference between the two sectors. And yeah, this big gap concerns me as I see it as an indicator of the amount of support and resources that the average project in each sector has. Anyhow, my next con is an even more fundamental problem, and that's the issue of fragmentation. Basically, there's a crap ton of L2s, right? With even more coming in the near future. But all these separate L2s means that liquidity, tooling, and just the ecosystem itself becomes fragmented. And this leads to several unique problems. For one, less liquidity means that when you trade on layer 2 dexes, you'll experience more slippage, which no one likes to see. Also, all these tools and apps on various L2s are probably not composable with one another, right? So that holds them back in terms of building network effects. These blockchains are all networks at the end of the day, so network effects are absolutely crucial to their growth and success. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that, but I definitely think this sector is getting way too fragmented, not to mention it's not even that big of a sector yet, so all this fragmentation going on just makes it even worse. Now unfortunately, this sector has a multitude of other issues to deal with beyond just fragmentation. And that brings me to my next con, which is all the fundamental hurdles that remain. The first of which is that L2s have to deal with trade-offs when it comes to security and decentralization. Most of these L2s use something called a sequencer, which basically batches transactions and submits them to the underlying L1. But most of these are controlled by multi-sig wallets, which means that a handful of team members have complete control over the L2's block production. And that makes them a joke when it comes to decentralization. Also, if a bug were discovered on these sequencers, it could endanger the user funds on the entire network. So yeah, the current state of these L2s are better described as a work in progress more than anything else. Now, another fundamental issue is that these L2's tokens have very little utility. Most L2s actually use ETH as their primary gas token, which means that there's really no reason to buy their own tokens besides governance and speculation, of course. So if you're looking for some really solid long-term bets, then you should probably avoid these L2 tokens in favor of other tokens with more utility. Otherwise, it's like gambling, where you have to hope and pray that the speculative bandwagon comes to support your particular token. But then there's an even more fundamental hurdle, which is the open question of whether modular or monolithic blockchains are the way to go. Right now, we're in the early innings of this battle or debate. But if we look at Solana's success with consumer applications and how newbies love to use that chain, well, perhaps there is a future filled with monolithic chains such as Solana, Aptos, or Sui, instead of our current smorgasbord of modular ones. And if that's the case, then L2s would go to zero as they just won't be needed anymore. So yeah, just some food for thought. Phew, that was a lot of pros and cons to digest, wasn't it? But now it's time to rank this sector against all others. So far, we have this list, but I'm gonna go with a hot take and put layer 2s all the way down here. I mean, I do think that these L2s are solid projects, but I worry about their value capture mechanisms, and I don't like how a lot of them launched with super high market caps. Therefore, if we're talking about a sector's potential for this cycle, well, I think this is a fair spot. Next up, I'm analyzing privacy coins and then AI crypto projects. So subscribe if you want to catch those. Otherwise, watch our DeFi sector video right here if you haven't already.